but let's go. We're going to read Alice in Wonderland, Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of have nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what use is of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, as well as she could. The hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasure of making daisy chains would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies. When suddenly a white rabbit with pink ears ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." When she thought it was afterwards, it occurred to her that she ought to have wondered at this. But at the time, all seemed quite natural. But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it, and then hurried on, Alice started to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat or a watch to take out of it. And burning with curiosity, she ran across the field after it, and fortunately was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel some way, and then dipped suddenly down. So suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her and to wonder what was going to happen. First she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she looked at the sides of the well and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon the pegs. She took down a jar from one of the shelves as she passed. It was labeled Orange Marmalade, but to her great disappointment, it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so managed to put it into one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Welcome, Randa. Thanks for stopping by. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this, I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll all think me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house, which was very likely true. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me see. That would be 4,000 miles down, I think. For you see, Alice had learnt several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and thought this was a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge. As there was no one to listen to her, still it was good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about right. But then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice had no idea what latitude was or longitude either, but thought they were nice, grand words to say. Presently she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny it'll seem to come out among the people who walk on their heads downwards. I think she was rather glad there was no one listening this time, as it didn't sound at all the right word. But I shall have to ask them what the name of their country is. No, please, ma'am, is this New Zealand or Australia? and she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? And what an ignorant little girl she'll think of me for asking. No, I'll never do to ask. Perhaps I shall see it written somewhere. Down, down, down. There was nothing else to do, so Alice soon began talking. If my stream abruptly stops in 5 minutes, it's because my computer has decided now is a great time to restart. I am trying desperately to convince it I don't want that. I think I've succeeded. Okay. Dinah will miss me very much tonight. I should think Dinah was the cat. I hope they'll remember her saucer of milk at tea time. Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid. But you might catch a bat, and that's very like a mouse, you know. So do cats eat bats, I wonder? And here Alice began to get rather sleepy, and went on saying to herself in a dreamy sort of way, Cats eat bats, do cats eat bats, and sometimes bats eat cats, for you see, as she couldn't answer either question, it didn't really much matter which way she put it. She felt that she was dozing off and had just begun to dream that she was walking hand in hand with Dinah and saying to her very earnestly, Now, Dinah, tell me the truth. Did you ever eat a bat? When suddenly, thump, thump, down she came on a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a teeny bit hurt. She jumped up onto her feet in a moment. She looked up, but it was all dark overhead. Before her was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight. Hurrying down it, there was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say, as it turned the corner, Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting. She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall, which was lit by a row of lamps hanging from the roof. There were doors all around the hall, but they were all locked. When Alice had been all the way down one side and up the other, trying every door, she walked sadly down the middle, wondering how she was ever going to get out. Suddenly, she came up upon a three-legged table, all made of solid glass. There was nothing on it except a tiny golden key, and Alice's first thought was that it might belong to one of the doors in the hall. But alas! Either the locks were too large or the key was too small, but at any rate it would not open any of them. However, on the second time around, she came upon a low curtain she had not noticed before, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fitted. Alice opened the door and found that it led into a small passage, not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage into the loveliest garden you have ever seen. How she longed to get out of the dark hall and wander among those beds of bright flowers and those cool fountains, but she could not even let her head through the door. Even if my head would go through, poor Alice thought, it would be of very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if I knew how to begin. For you see, so many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think that very few things indeed were really impossible. There seemed to be no use in waiting by the little door, so she went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key on it, or at any rate, a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle on it, which certainly had not been there before, said Alice. And round the neck of the bottle was a paper label with the words, Drink me, beautifully printed in large letters. It was all very well to say, Drink me, but the wise little Alice was not going to do that in a hurry. No, I'll look first, she said, and see if it's marked poison or not. For she had read several nice little histories about children who had gotten burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rules their friends had taught them, such as that a red hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and if you cut your finger very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. And she had never forgotten that if you drink much from a bottle marked poison, it is almost certain to disagree with you sooner or later. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it very nice, it had, in fact, a sort of mixed flavor of cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey, toffee, and hot buttered toast. She very soon finished it off. Yes, usually poisons disagree with you after a while, Zalek. But now you know, obviously, just like she learned. Getting a little hydrated. All right. Some time passes. It's a curious feeling, said Alice. I must be shutting up like a telescope. And so it was indeed. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened up as though she was now the right size for going through the door into that lovely garden. First, however, she waited for a few minutes to see if she was going to shrink any further. She felt a little nervous about it. For it might end, you know, she said Alice to herself. In my going out altogether like a candle, I wonder what I should be like then. And she tried to fancy what the flame of a candle is like after the candle is blown out. For she could not remember ever having seen such a thing. After a while, finding that nothing more was happening, she decided on going into the garden at once. But, alas, poor Alice, when she got to the door, she found she had forgotten the little golden key. And when she went back to the table for it, she found she could not possibly reach it. She could see it quite plainly through the glass, and she tried her best to climb up one of the legs of the table, but it was too slippery. And when she tired herself out of trying, the poor little thing sat down and cried. Come, there's no use to crying like that. And said Alice to herself, rather sharply, I advise you leave off this minute. She generally gave herself very good advice, though she very seldom followed it. And sometimes she scolded herself so severely as to bring tears to her eyes. And once she remembered trying to box her own ears for having cheated herself in a game of croquet she was playing against herself. For this curious child was very fond of pretending to be two people. But it's no use now, thought poor Alice, to pretend to be two people. Why, there's hardly enough of me to make one respectable person. Soon her eye fell on the little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it and found in it a very small cake, on which the words, Eat me, were beautifully marked in currants. Well, I'll eat it, thought Alice, and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I will just creep up under the door, so either way I'll get into the garden, and I don't care which happens. She ate a little bit, and said anxiously to herself, Which way, which way? holding her hands on top of her head to feel which way it was growing. And she quite and she was quite surprised to find that she remained the same size. To be sure, this generally happens when one eats cake, but Alice had got so much into the way of expecting nothing, but out of the way things to happen, that it seemed quite dull and stupid for life to go on in the common way. So she set to work and very soon finished off the cake. Hmm. That's the end of chapter 1. Let me catch up with chat here. Say like, didn't it say that? Yes, it's all. This book is full of great advice so far. If you cut yourself, you will bleed, and if you drink poison, you might get a tummy ache or die. That's what we've learned so far. Uh, Wolf's gonna have to catch the VOD. No worries. Thank you for stopping by. And hello, Monty. Glad to see you here. We're just doing a little reading of Alice in Wonderland because I figured it'd be really weird, and also it's out of copyright, so I can read it on stream. All right, little hydration. And by the way, Monty is also a streamer, and she is super awesome. Go check her out at her Cozy Dragon Shrine. Okay. Oh, sorry. You'll see why I was laughing at a moment. I was looking at the first word and being like, that's not English, but that's quite the point. Okay. Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for a moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. now I'm open Now I'm opening out the largest telescope I've ever was. Goodbye, feet. For when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you, dears. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble yourself about you. You must manage the best you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want them to go. Oh, let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. And she went on planning to herself how she could manage it. They must go by the carrier, she thought, and how funny it'll seem, sending presents to one's own feet, and how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, hearthrug, near the fender, with love, Alice. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just then, her head struck against the roof of the hall, and in fact, she was now more than 9 feet tall. And she at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was as much as she could do, lying down on one side, to look through into the garden with one eye. But to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and started to cry again. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Alice. A great little girl like you. She might as well say this, to go on crying this way. Stop this moment, I tell you. But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears, until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep and reaching half down the hall. After a time, she heard a little pattering of feet in the distance, and she hastily dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit returning, splendidly dressed, with a pair of white kid gloves in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, Oh, the Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, won't she savage if I keep her waiting? Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask help of anyone, So, when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice, "If you please, sir." The rabbit started violently, dropping the white kid gloves and the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and, as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time, went on talking. "Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. And yesterday, things went on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I can't think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the question is, who in the world am I? Ah, that's the puzzle." And she began thinking over all the children she knew that were of the same age as herself, to see if she could have changed for any of them. Hmm, I'm sure I'm not Ada, she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't go in ringlets at all. I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows very little. Maybe she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. Hmm, I'll try if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12. 4 times 6 is 13. 4 times 7 is. Oh dear. I shall never get to 20 at any rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome, and Rome. No, that's all wrong, I'm certain. Uh, I must have been changed for Mabel. I can't try and say, "How doth the little?" And she crossed her hands in her lap, as if she was saying lessons, and began to repeat it, her voice sounding hoarse and strange, and the words did not come the same as they used to. "How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerful he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcome little fishes with gently smiling jaws." "I'm sure those are not the right words," said Alice, and her eyes filled with tears again as she went on. "I must be Mabel after all. I shall have to go and live in the poky little town, and have next to no toys to play with. And oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I am Mabel, I'll stay down here. It'll be no use their putting their heads down and saying, 'Come on up again, dear.' I shall only look up and say, 'Who am I then? Tell me this first, and then if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till I'm somebody else.' But oh dear," cried Alice with a sudden burst of tears, "I do wish they had put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being alone, all alone down here." As she said this, she was looking down at her hands, and was surprised to see that they had put on one of the rabbit's little white kid gloves while she was talking. "How can I have done that?" she thought. I must be growing small again." She got up and went to the table to measure herself by it, and found that, as nearly as she could guess, she was now about 2 feet high, and was going on shrinking rapidly. She soon found out that the cause of this was the fan she was holding, and she dropped it hastily, just in time to avoid shrinking away again. "That was a narrow escape," said Alice, a good deal frightened by the sudden change, but very glad to find herself still in existence. "And now for the garden." And she ran with all speed back to the little door. But, alas, the little door was shut again, and the little golden key was lying by the glass table as before. "And things are worse than ever," she thought, "for I never was so small as this before, never, and I declare it's too bad that is it." She said these words. As she said these words, her feet slipped, and in another moment, splash! She was up to her chin in salt water. Her first idea was that she had somehow fallen into the sea. And in that case, I can go back by railway, she said to herself. Alice had been to the seaside once in her life and had come to the general conclusion that wherever you go to on the English coast, you find a number of bathing machines in the sea, some children digging in the sand with wooden spades, then a row of lodged houses, and behind them a railway station. However, she soon made out that she was in a pool of tears which she had wept when she was 9 feet high. I wish I hadn't cried so much, Alice said as she swam about, trying to find her way out. I shall be punished for this now, I suppose, by being drowned in my own tears. That will be a queer thing, to be sure. However, everything is queer today. Just then she heard something splashing about in the pool a little way off, and she swam nearer to make out what it was. At first she thought it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was now, and she soon made out that it was only a mouse that had slipped in like herself. Would it be of any use now, she thought, to speak to the mouse? Everything is so out of the way down here that I should think very likely it can talk. At any rate, there's no harm in trying. So she began. Oh, mouse, uh, do you know the way out to the pool? I'm very tired of swimming about here. Oh, mouse. Alice thought this must be the right way of speaking to a mouse. She had never done such a thing before, but she remembered having seen in her brother's Latin grammar a mouse, of a mouse, to a mouse, oh mouse. The mouse looked at her rather inquisitively and seemed to her to wink with one of its little eyes, but said nothing. Perhaps it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. I dare say it's a French mouse, come over with William the Conqueror. For with all her knowledge of history, Alice had no very clear notion how long ago anything had happened. So she began again. I cannot speak French. This is a problem. Aut est ma chaste? Which was the first sentence in her French lesson book. The mouse gave a sudden leap out of the water and seemed to quiver all over with fright. Oh, I beg your pardon, cried Alice hastily, afraid that she had hurt the poor animal's feelings. I quite forgot you don't like cats. Not like cats, cried the mouse in a shrill, passionate voice. Would you like cats if you were me? Perhaps not, said Alice in a soothing tone, but don't be angry about it. And yet I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you'd take a fancy to cats if you could only see her. She is such a dear, quiet thing. Alice went on, half to herself, as she swam lazily about the pool. And she sits, purring so nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. And she is such a nice, soft thing to nurse. And she's such a capital one for catching mice. Oh, I beg your pardon. Alice cried again, for this time the mouse was bristling all over, and she felt certain it must really be offended. Uh, we don't have to talk about her anymore, if you'd rather not. We indeed, cried the mouse, who was trembling down to the end of its tail. As if I would talk on such a subject. Our family always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't let me hear that name again. I won't indeed, said Alice, in a great hurry to change the subject of conversation. Are, are you Are you fond of dogs? The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. There, there's such a nice little dog near our house. I should like to show you. A little bright-eyed terrier, with such long curly brown hair. and it'll fetch things when you throw them, and it'll sit up and beg for its dinner, and all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them, and it belongs to a farmer, and he says it's so useful, it's worth £100. He says it'll kill rats, and oh dear, Alice cried in a sorrowful tone. I'm afraid I've offended you again. For the mouse was swimming away from her as hard as it could, and making quite a commotion in the pool as it went. So she softly called after it, Dear mouse, do come back again. We won't talk about cats or dogs either, if you don't like them. When the mouse heard this, it turned around and swam slowly back to her. Its face was quite pale, with passion, Alice thought, and it said in a low, trembling voice, uh, Let us get to shore, and then I'll tell you my history, and you'll understand why I hate cats and dogs. It was high time to go, for the pool was growing quite crowded with birds and animals that had fallen into it. There was a duck and a dodo, a lory and an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole party swam to shore. And that is the end of chapter 2 of Alice in Wonderland. Let me get a drink really quick. Okay. Let's see. Do another chapter. Chapter 3. A Caucus Race and a Long Tail. They were indeed a queer-looking party that assembled on the bank. The birds with draggled feathers, the animals with fur clinging close to them, and all dripping wet, cross, and uncomfortable. The first question, of course, was how to get dry again. They had a consultation about it, and after a few minutes it seemed quite natural to Alice to find herself talking familiarly with them, as if she had known them all her life. Indeed, she had quite a long argument with the Lory, who at last turned sulky, and would say, I am older than you and must know better. And this Alice would not allow without knowing how old it was. And as the Lory positively refused to tell its age, there was no more to be said. At last the mouse, who seemed to be a person of authority among them all, called out, Sit down, all of you, and listen to me. I'll soon make you dry enough. They all sat down at once in a large ring, with the mouse in the middle. Alice kept her eyes anxiously fixed on it, for she felt sure she would catch a bad cold if she did not get dry very soon. Ahem, said the mouse with an important air. Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Silence all around, if you please. William the Conqueror, whose cause was favored by the Pope, was soon submitted to by the English, who wanted leaders and had been of late much accustomed to usurping and conquest. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria. Ugh, said the Lory with a shiver. Beg your pardon, said the mouse, frowning very positively. Did you speak? Not I, said the Lory hastily. That's what I thought, said the mouse. I proceed. Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, declared for him, and even Steingrand, the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, found inadvisable. Found what? Said the duck. Found it, the mouse replied rather crossly. Of course you know what it means. I know what it means well enough. When I find a thing, said the duck, it's generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop find? The mouse did not notice this question, but hurriedly went on. Found it advisable to go with Edgar Atheling to meet William and offer him the crown. William's conduct at first was moderate, but the insolence of the Normans. How are you getting on now, my dear? he continued, turning to Alice as he spoke. I'm as wet as ever, said Alice in a melancholy tone. Doesn't seem to dry me at all. In that case, said the dodo solemnly, rising to his feet, I move that the meeting adjourn for the immediate adoption of more energetic remedies. Speak English, said the eaglet. I don't know the meaning of half those long words, and what's more, I don't believe you do either. And the eaglet bent down its head to hide a smile. Some of the birds tittered audibly. What I was going to say, said the dodo in an offended tone, was that the best thing to get us dry would be a caucus race. What what is a caucus race? Said Alice. Not that she wanted much to know, but the dodo had paused as if it thought that somebody ought to speak, and no one else seemed inclined to say anything. Why, said the dodo, the best way to explain it is to do it. And as you might like to try the thing yourself, some winter day, I will tell you how the dodo managed it. First, it marked out a race course in a short circle. The exact shape doesn't matter, it said. And then all the party were placed along the course, here and there. There was no 1, 2, 3 and away, but they began running when they liked and left off when they liked, so that it was not easy to know when the race was over. However, when they had been running half an hour or so, they were quite dry again. The dodo suddenly called out, The race is over, and they all crowded around it, panting and asking, But who has won? This question the dodo could not answer without a great deal of thought, and it sat for a long time with one finger pressed to its forehead, the position in which you usually see Shakespeare in the pictures of him. While the rest waited in silence, at last the dodo said, Everybody has won, and all must have prizes. But who is to give us prizes? Quite a chorus of voices asked. Why, she, of course, said the dodo, pointing to Alice with one finger, and the whole party at once crowded around her, calling out in confused way, Prizes, prizes, and Alice had no idea what to do. And in despair, she put her hands in her pockets and pulled out a box of comfits. Luckily, the salt water had not gotten into it, and handed them around as prizes. There was exactly one apiece all around. But she must have a prize herself, you know, said the mouse. Of course, replied the dodo very gravely. What else have you got in your pockets? He went on, turning to Alice. Only a thimble, she said sadly. Hand it over here, said the dodo. Then they all crowded round her once more, while the dodo solemnly presented the thimble, saying, We beg your acceptance of this elegant thimble. And when he had finished his short speech, they all cheered. Alice thought the whole thing very absurd, but they all looked so grave that she did not dare laugh, and as she could not think of anything to say, she simply bowed and took the thimble, looking as solemn as she could. The next thing was to eat the comfits. This caused some noise and confusion, as the large birds complained that they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and had to be patted on their backs. However, it was over at last, and they sat down again in the ring and begged the mouse to tell them something more. You promised to tell me your history, you know, said Alice. And why is it you hate C and D? She asked in a whisper, half afraid that he would be offended again. Mine is a long tale, said the mouse, turning to Alice. It is a long tale, certainly, said Alice, looking down with wonder at the mouse's tail. But why do you call it sad? And she kept on puzzling about it while the mouse was speaking, so that her idea of the tale was something like this. Fury said to me a mouse that he met in the house, Let us both go to the law. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial. We must have our trial. For really this morning I have nothing to do. Said to the mouse, to the cur, such a trial, dear sir, with no jury or judge, with the wasting our breath. I'll be the judge, be the jury, said the cunning old furry. I'll be the whole cause and condemn you to death. You're not attending, said the mouse to Alice severely. What are you thinking of? I beg your pardon, said Alice very humbly. You had got to the fifth bend, I think. I had not, cried the mouse sharply and angrily. A not, said Alice, always ready to make herself useful and looking anxiously about her. Oh, do let me help undo it. I shall do nothing of the sort, said the mouse, getting up and walking away. You insult me by talking such nonsense. I didn't mean to, pleaded poor Alice, but you're so easily offended, you know. The mouse only growled in reply. Please come back and finish your story, Alice called after it, and the other joined into the chorus. Yes, please do, but the mouse only shook its head impatiently and walked a little quicker. What a pity it was. What a pity it wouldn't stay, sighed the lorry as soon as it was quite out of sight. And an old crab took the opportunity of saying to her daughter, Ah, my dear, let this be a lesson to you to never lose your temper. Hold your tongue, ma, said the young crab in a little snappishly. You're enough to try the patience of an oyster. I wish I had our Diana here. I know I do, said Alice aloud, addressing nobody in particular. She'd soon fetch it back. And who is Dinah, if I might venture to ask the question, said the lorry. Alice replied eagerly, for she was always ready to talk about her pet. Dinah's our cat, and she's such a capital one for catching mice, you can't think. Oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. Why, she'll eat a little bird as soon as she'll look at it. This speech caused a remarkable sensation among the party. Some of the birds hurried off at once. One old magpie began wrapping itself up very carefully, remarking, I really must be getting home. The night air doesn't suit my throat. And a canary called out trembling voice to its children, Come away, my dears. It's high time you were all in bed. On various pretexts, they all moved off, and Alice was left alone. I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said to herself in melancholy tones. Nobody seems to like her down here, and I'm sure she's the best cat in the world. Oh dear, Dinah, I wonder if I shall ever see you any more. And here poor Alice began to cry again, for she felt very lonely and low-spirited. And in a little while, however, she again heard the little pattering footsteps in the distance, and she looked up eagerly, half hoping that the mouse had changed its mind and was coming back to finish the story. And that was the end of chapter 3. Let me catch up on comments really quick. Monty, you're still here. I feel like it's very late where you are. Good. I'm glad you're getting to fall asleep. Hey, Destiny. I'm as wet as ever. Clip it if you want. And cut. Wait, your title says Alice in Wonderland. Yes. 'Tis what I'm reading. Oh, alive in Wonderland. Well, we are alive. Here, hold on. Let me fix it. Thank you. Oh, thank you. There we go. I'm sure my notification message wasn't up to date. That's okay. All right. Let's see. All right, all right. Enjoying it so far? I've never read through like Alice in Wonderland proper. I don't think, at least. Maybe it was one of those books I was supposed to read in high school, but everybody just like got the cliff notes for. That feels like something I would have done. school English teacher. I have time for at least one or two more chapters. Let's do it. For anybody new that's joining, we're reading Alice in Wonderland. We're on chapter 4. The rabbit sends in a little bill. It was the white rabbit, trotting slowly back again, and looking anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something, and she heard it muttering to itself, "The Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, my dear paws, oh, my fur and whiskers! She'll get me executed. As sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them? Oh, I wonder." Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white kid gloves, and she very good naturedly began hunting about for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall with the little glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about, and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan, quick now." And Alice was so frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed, without trying to explain that the mistake it had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am. But I'd better not take him his fans and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, in great fear lest she would meet the real Marianne and be turned out of the house before she could find the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," said Alice to herself, to be, go- to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose Tine'll be sending me on messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk." "Coming in a minute, nurse." "But I've got to see that the mouse doesn't get out." Only I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that." By the time she found her way into the tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she'd hoped, a fan and two or three pairs of tiny white kid gloves, she took up the fan and a pair of gloves, and was just going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that was stood near the looking glass. There was no label this time with the words "Drink me," but nevertheless, she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting is sure to happen," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for really I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drunk half the bottle, she found her head pressed against the ceiling, and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out of that door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute, there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of laying down, with one elbow against the door, and the other arm curled around her head. Still she went on growing, and as a last resort, she put one arm out the window and one foot up the chimney, and said to herself, "Now I can do no more, whatever happens. What will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew no longer. Since it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I almost wish I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole, and yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied this kind of thing never happened. And now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. I'll write one, but I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up any more here. But then, thought Alice, shall I ever get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way, never to be an old woman. But then, always having lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she asked herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books. And so she went on, talking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation of it altogether. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Marianne, Marianne, said the voice, fetch me my gloves this moment. Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled. Still she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now almost 1,000 times as large as the rabbit and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opened inward and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, then I'll go around and get in at the window. That you won't, thought Alice. After waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch at the air. She did not get a hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit's. Pat, Pat, where are you? And then a voice she had never heard before. Sure thing, I'm here, digging for apples, Your Honor. Digging for apples, indeed, said the rabbit angrily. Here, come and help me out with this. Sounds of more broken glass. Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window? Sure, it's an arm, Your Honor. An arm? You goose! Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window. Sure it does, Your Honor, but it's an arm for sure. Well, it's got no business here, at any rate. Go and take it away. There was a long silence after this, and Alice could not hear whispers, could only hear whispers now and then, such as, Sure, I don't like it, Your Honor, at all, at all. But, as I tell you, you coward. And at last she spread her hand out again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were two little shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last came a rumbling of little cartwheels and the sound of a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the words, Where's the other ladder? Why hadn't to bring but one? Bill's got the other one. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put him up on the corner. No, time together first. It's coming down. Heads below. A loud crash. Now, who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. Who's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't, then. Bill's to go to town. Here, Bill, the master says you're the one to go down the chimney. Oh, So Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he? Said Alice to herself. Shy, they seem to put everything on Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure. But I think I can kick a little. She drew her foot as far down as the chimney as she could, and waited till she heard a little animal, she couldn't guess what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney. Then, saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what happened next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill!" Then the rabbit's voice along, "Catch him, you by the hedge!" Then silence. Then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head. Brandy now. Don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a feeble, squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more, thank ye. I'm better now. But I'm a great deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I go like a skyrocket." "So you did, old fellow?" "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set Dinah on you." There was dead silence instantly, and Alice thought to herself, "I wonder what they'll do next. If they had any sense, they'd take off the roof." After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, "A burrowful will do, to begin with." Sorry, a barrowful. A barrowful of what? Thought Alice. But she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. "Put a stop to this myself," she said to herself and shouted, "Better not do that again," which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. "If I eat one of the cakes," she thought, "I'm sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't possibly be making me larger, it must be making me smaller, I suppose." So she swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs, who were giving it some kind of bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, but she ran off as hard as she could and soon found herself safe and in the thick woods. "The first thing I've got to do," Alice said to herself as she wandered about the woods, "is to grow to my right size again, and the second thing is to find my way into the lovely garden. I think that's the best plan." Sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it. And while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes, and feebly stretched out one paw trying to touch her. "Poor little thing," said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle at it. But she was so terribly frightened all the time at the thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would very likely eat her in spite of all of her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all of its feet at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over. The moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush for the stick and tumbled head over heels in a hurry to get a hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game with a cart horse and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran round the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way forwards each time and a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once and ran till she was quite tired out of breath till the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. And yet, what a dear little puppy it was, thought Alice, as she leant against a buttercup to rest herself and fanned herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much, if I'd only been the right size to do so. Oh dear, I've nearly forgotten. I've got to grow up again. Well, let me see. How is it managed? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other. But the great question is what? The great question certainly was what. Alice looked all around her at the flowers and the blades of grass, but she did not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, and when she had another look at it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was at the top of it. She stretched herself up on tippy toe and peered over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met with one of those large blue caterpillar that was sitting on the top with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and taking not the smallest notice of her or anything else. And that is the end of chapters 4. Alrighty. Okay. All right. So that was the end of chapter 4 of Alice in Wonderland. Um, I'm enjoying this, so I think I'll definitely continue this, but I'm going to give my voice a break. I'm trying to slowly build up longer and longer reading streams, so bear with me. But since we've passed the hour mark of me talking straight, I think I'll take a pause. I won't be back on tomorrow, most likely. We'll see. But I will be back on Wednesday, so make sure to hit that follow button if you want to listen to more Alice in Wonderland. If you want to see the other things that I'm up to, I do play games and do that kind of thing. The normal streamer bit here on this channel as well. But otherwise, thank you, Zalik and Wolf and Monty and Destiny and Cut for all showing up. I do appreciate it, and I hope to see you next time. Hey, have a wonderful rest of your Monday, okay? Bye, guys. Mwah.